Because he didn't want to spend every day with me. My husband bought me a robot that looked exactly like him. He was impatient and treated me like a punching bag. Are you satisfied now? The robot is great. At first, I refused to eat because I had a relapse of depression. It knelt down and cooed while kissing. Good baby. Have some more. Later. In bed. It said the same thing. The main text begins. There was another argument. John strode downstairs with his suitcase. I struggled to turn the wheelchair around and threw a stack of plane tickets at him from behind. Who in London is there? Is it worth you going there all year round? Across the stairs. The plane tickets scattered like snowflakes. John paused. Indifferently looking up. Pulling his lips into a sneer. At least London doesn't have you. After saying that, the door slammed shut. I was in a daze. Suddenly, a pair of hands reached around my shoulders. A light pine scent enveloped me. The person gently wiped away the tears on my cheeks. Squatting down. Looking up at me. Looking at this face in front of me. Exactly the same as John's when he was 20. I was angry inside. And subconsciously wanted to slap him. My hand lifted up. But I held it in the air. Michael is just a robot. He is John's venting bag and scapegoat. That he bought for me because he couldn't stand me. What does John's betrayal of me have to do with him? If robots have feelings, I guess they would be annoyed by me too. I was unable to lower my hand. But the next second, there was a crisp sound on Michael's fair face. No matter my shocked gaze, Michael turned his head, his mouth bleeding, and raised his hand to slap himself again. I was so scared that I quickly held his hand. Are you crazy? Michael bent his beautiful eyes and pressed his hot side face into the palm of my hand, rubbing it. You care about me. I don't know which of his circuits has blown to come to this conclusion. Michael leaned forward and kissed me. Sticky and sweet to coax me. Baby. If you care about me, just go with the flow. And eat well tonight. Okay. I was so shocked that I was speechless. That I forgot to say no. Michael. Ever since I bought you, you've been strange. With a face like John when he was 20. And a demeanor that makes it seem like John used to treat me with contempt. If I didn't know for sure that you're a robot, I'd suspect that it's John from 20 years ago who's come back. But sometimes you show a different kind of strength. Like now. As I pull my clothes tight. Ashamed and angry. Telling Michael to get out of the bathroom. How many times have I said, I don't need. I can wash myself. Like last time when you fell out of the bathtub. And bleed. Michael's dark eyes stare at me. With an inorganic coldness. I refuse to give in. And stare back. Word for word. That's none of your business. This is an order. Get out. Michael's eyes droop. Suddenly, he leans down and takes me around the knees. And carries me into the bathtub. Tearing off my tie. He ties up my struggling hands. When I strain to straighten up, Michael leans in very close. Long. Straight eyelashes like swallow feathers. I froze. As he told me in a leisurely manner. My little master. You can order me around a lot of the time. Unfortunately. There are exceptions to this rule. The result was that I was washed by Michael. Dripping wet. And wrapped in a towel. Carried out. With my face and neck all red. From anger. I had told John several times before about a similar situation. And asked him to send Michael away. But John didn't listen at all. He lowered his head and fiddled with his phone. I don't know who he was talking to. To brush me off. The robot's every action is within the scope of safety procedures. It's for your own good. After a while, John took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and leaned back in his chair to look at me, with a half smile, and a very light tone of voice. Why, Michael? Being a stand-in isn't good enough. You have to make me be your dog again. Like I used to be. I was unusually quiet. And never told on him again. As a result, Michael became more and more brazen. And even climbed into my bed. At dawn the next day, I rolled onto my side into a warm chest. And his hands tightened around my waist. Naturally, he embraced me. I opened my eyes in surprise. and looked at Michael's sleeping face. I muttered, "Don't go too far." Michael woke up at the sound of my voice. His eyes were clear. He smiled innocently and took advantage of my defenselessness to kiss me on the forehead. Then he got up and helped me get dressed. I felt numb as he played with me like a doll. Michael reminded me that we had to go home today. My expression froze. I frowned in resistance. After the car accident, bad things happened to me one after the other. First, my parents found their biological daughter and ignored me. Then, my biological daughter came back and turned out to be John's ex-girlfriend, Mary. If Mary hadn't gone missing back then, she and John would have been childhood sweethearts. And they would have gotten married without a hitch. Unlike me, who was bad-tempered and spoiled, and drove everyone away. And now I've got this depression. Everyone thinks I'm being childish and jealous. At the time, Mary insisted on going to the UK alone. And my parents felt guilty, worried that she didn't know anyone. So they often asked John to visit. Because nominally, John was her brother-in-law and considered family. So my anger was just unreasonable. Only Michael disagreed. He said depression was no small problem. To make me take it seriously, he even produced a 20-page paper. I blacked out at the sight of the German at the beginning. So Michael coaxed and cajoled me into seeing a psychologist a few times. The results were average. I still had low appetite. Crying for no reason. I lose my temper and then fall into self-loathing. Apart from Michael, no one wants to spend time with me. Today is Mary's birthday. John flew to London himself to pick her up. Mary's family is throwing a banquet to welcome their little princess home. Mary's mother even ordered me to be there. What did I teach you when you were little? A girl has to be both strong and gentle. Not like you, who cowers and cries when you break a leg. Mary has suffered so much. But she never complains. When we arrive at Mary's family home, Michael is not allowed to be there. The butler will take me in. Looking at this brightly lit villa, which is clearly my home after more than 20 years, I feel a little afraid to go in. I subconsciously look back. Michael is sitting in the car. His gaze is soft. He taps his wrist. I am wearing the electronic ring he made. As long as he monitors my mood swings, he can receive my location and find me. He says, "Trust in the magic of the Savior. My little Cinderella." I don't know when it started. I became very obedient to Michael's words. As long as he's here, I can have a nest to hide in and be protected. Is that a good thing? John thinks it's normal anyway. He thinks I've just transferred my dependence on him to a robot that looks just like him. In summary, the person I can't live without is probably still John. Realizing this, John looks uncertain and not very happy. We had a fight just the other day. And now he's by my side adjusting his tie. As if every minute with me is taking its toll. Luckily, Mary's mother calls him over, asking him to lead Mary in the first dance. They kept looking at us in all directions. And they never stopped. I knew what they were thinking. They were just laughing at me. I used to be so proud. But now I'm crippled and in a wheelchair. I had to watch my husband dance intimately with his ex-girlfriend. Without saying a word, I turned my wheelchair and tried to ignore the prying eyes. I went to the terrace and didn't want anyone to follow me. I could smell the strong smell of alcohol and heard a sigh close to my ear. "Poor you, Missy. The phoenix has turned into a common chicken. John doesn't love you anymore. How about I love you? How much is it per month?" He paused for a moment and laughed. "According to the price of a prostitute." I sneered. Without saying a word, I was about to slap him. When I was in school, I couldn't stand it when David bullied the weak. I slapped him in front of the whole school. David was quick and grabbed my wrist. His fingers caught the electronic ring. He smiled sinisterly. "You've become addicted to beating people up, haven't you? You still think you're the same high and mighty young lady you once were. In the past, John had to lick you from head to toe. Now, his disgusting gaze scans you from top to bottom. Now you're only worth a little for your face." Just as he finishes speaking, David's expression suddenly distorts. His forehead twitches. His whole head is yanked backwards. The chandelier on the balcony sways in the light. Michael. His tall body silhouetted against the light. His silhouette is mean and ruthless. He grabs David by the hair and slams him against the edge of the table. Fuck. There's a loud crash. Dark blood trickled from David's confused eyebrows to his chin. His unfocused eyes moved to Michael. Unbelievable. John. Are you sick? Come on. Michael's answer was to knock David against the edge of the table again. The force was fierce. The table broke off a leg. The noise spread to the inner hall. John and Mary were walking in front. Mary saw Michael's face. Obviously stunned. On the terrace. John. In his 40s. And Michael. Still a teenager. Stood facing each other. With a sense of conflict between maturity and youth. That made people feel dazed. John ordered Michael to let go. Michael didn't move. John's eyes were fierce. And he repeated. Michael didn't show any expression. Some blood splattered on the side of his face. Which looked creepy. John had the right to deal with him. But he still looked at me. As if asking me. If I was satisfied. With this moment. I felt my heartbeat quicken for a moment. And when I reacted. I had already reached out to him. So Michael slowly let go. And let David drop to his knees in front of me. When he came over. I was afraid that the blood on David's head would soil my shoes. So I kicked David away a little with my foot. Not too hard. John looked at me and trembled faintly. He held Michael's hand tightly. Seeking protection. Frowning. He asked. Jenny. What's wrong with you? I didn't look at him. I was afraid that I would lose control of my emotions in public. I didn't realize that my tone had become pleading. Yes. Michael. Whispered. Let's go home. It wasn't until then. That John began to believe that I was mentally ill. John handled David's affairs as quickly as he could. And hurried home. But he ran into Michael. Who was carrying me after a shower. And putting me to bed. He kissed me on the forehead with familiarity. As if he were my husband. The door slammed shut. John watched Michael's actions. And laughed incredulously. I asked you to take care of her. And you've taken care of her right up to the bed. Facing John's questioning. Michael is courteous to the extreme. Sir. This is within the scope of safety procedures. It is my duty to comfort the owner in place of a negligent partner. John's voice is cold as ice. It seems that your company's safety procedures need to be revised. He tells Michael to leave. But I hold on to Michael's clothes tightly. A fear arises in me like a fledgling bird about to lose its nest. I cry out in fear. No, don't go. I cried. And snuggled into Michael's arms. As if his body were my shelter. Only by clinging to him would I be loved. Seeing me like this. John's face turned stern. His mature contours had long lost the gentleness of youth. He stepped over and reached out. Roughly grasping me from Michael's arms. I couldn't control my emotions. And screamed desperately. John's expression was blank for a moment. He tried to calm me. But he hadn't held me in a long time. His fingers were stiff and clumsy as they touched me. And I couldn't bear the thought of his hands having touched Mary too. I kept pushing him away. The lover I had once longed to become one with. Had suddenly become a monster that made my hair stand on end and made me fear to approach. John was unusually at a loss for words. He touched my right leg. Jenny. What's wrong with you? Does your leg hurt? Look carefully. It's John. My insensate right leg was touched by someone who no longer loved me. It was as if I was reliving the trauma of the car accident all over again. My chest heaved. And I could hardly breathe. Michael. While John was in a daze. Pulled him away sharply. And leaned over to wrap me in the quilt and take me into his arms. Whispering soothing words to me the whole time. With a patience. I'm afraid even the old John could never have mustered. John was speechless for a long time. Until I heard John's heavy footsteps moving away from the room. And my trembling body slowly subsided. The room fell silent. I was too weak to ask Michael. If I had become a crazy woman. Michael shook his head. And said I was cute that way. Liar. I'm not cute at all. Otherwise. Why is it that everyone I've ever loved ends up hurting me? My foster parents. John. And even the murderer who tried to run me over with his car. Who used to be my nanny. My car accident wasn't an accident, but a deliberate attempt on my life. When I woke up and saw the murderer's face on the news, for a moment, I felt the sky fallen on me. I felt like I was in the confessional, confessing to the priest, stammering to Michael, that she was the one I thought would love me the most. I was adopted by Mary's mother when I was 6. The Mary family was a family that was very strict with their offspring. With Mary's father and Mary's mother, I had to conform to their standards in every move I made. Play and sweets were luxuries. Once my grades fell short of expectations, the Mary family would show their disappointment. It was as if they were saying, "After all, you're not their biological child." I have always been terrified of other people's disappointed gazes. I trembled and learned everything I could about knowledge and etiquette that made me want to vomit, just to get their nod of approval. At that time, I regarded this behavior of hurting myself to satisfy others as a prerequisite for being loved. Only my nanny Susan gave me the illusion of being spoiled. Although sometimes she did things in private that made me feel uncomfortable. She would hug me, and kiss me, and feed me candy, after every punishment, in an incredibly gentle tone, cooing to my little bird, and my good little dog. With her, I received maternal love. So even when I discovered that Susan often stole things from the house, I chose to keep it a secret. I was afraid that if she was kicked out, there would be no one left to love me. But I didn't expect that when the theft was discovered, Susan would immediately frame me. She told Mary's mother that Jenny was sick, and a compulsive liar, and a thief. From then on, the Marys looked at me with even more suspicion. Susan became increasingly mean to me. The punishments of being locked in my room became more and more extreme, because Susan knew that from now on, even if I couldn't stand it anymore and complained, nobody would believe a bad child who lied and stole. As I said this, I couldn't help trembling. The dark shadow of my childhood reached out its invisible hand and grasped my crippled right leg and dragged it down into the abyss. But then, Michael suddenly squeezed my shoulder hard and pulled me back from my trance. He touched my cold, sweaty forehead, his beautiful eyes like obsidian, as if in him I could pour out everything, and everything would be understood. He asked me softly, "What had the nanny done to you in that room?" At one point, I almost told him the source of my depression, the haunting nightmare of my childhood. If only I could tell Michael, I would be saved. But I couldn't make a sound. As if an invisible hand had strangled my throat. My throat was choking. My eyes are misting up. I so desperately want Michael to save me. But I can't make a sound. Michael doesn't press. His deep, ocean-like eyes hide an infinite amount of tolerance. I'm inside them. And I'm free. Then he changes the subject. Like a detective. Relaxed as if playing a decryption game with his beloved child. Analyzing why Nanny Susan wanted to run me over. The official explanation is, Susan had latent mental illness after she was caught stealing and left the Mary family. A few years later, she was discharged from the hospital and lost control of her revenge. She planned the hit-and-run murder. Everyone found this reasonable. Michael, however, said that there was more to the story. He listed the criminal psychology evidence from various countries in a fluent and elegant manner. And the content was so obscure that it was hypnotic. I reluctantly listened for a while, but soon couldn't hold my eyelids any longer and fell asleep in a daze. The next day, I asked Michael what conclusion he had reached. But he gave a cunning smile and asked for a bribe. He then turned his face sideways and kissed me. I'll tell you. After last night's heart-to-heart talk, Michael and I have grown closer. He is no longer just a strange robot, but someone I'm willing to trust, and someone who will protect me. So I also looked lively and rolled my eyes at him. Susan died of a heart attack after the hit and run anyway. It didn't seem important to find out the motives of a mentally ill person. I desperately wished I could get better and stop being obsessed with depression and the past. I volunteered to see a psychiatrist, But Michael seemed dissatisfied with the previous few sessions. His tone was arrogant. And he concluded that psychiatrists are all useless. His voice carried outside the door. John, who had just led a large group of psychiatrists to the door. What's the expression on John's face these days? It's like he's trying to throw a stone at his own feet. He's very unhappy. He's just like me before. He hinted several times for me to stay away from Michael. Don't you think this robotic behavior is strange? I said. No's cute. John choked. And his face turned ugly. As he said in a strange voice. If I touch you, you'll go crazy. And that thing harassing you with my face won't bother you anymore. Right. I reflected on this. And looked carefully at John's face, which had been blessed by the years. And was extraordinarily handsome. The glory of his successful career made him even more attractive than when he was 20. Even though the ring on his ring finger was never removed. The young women around him are still attracted to him like moths to a flame. He is the perfect husband who, according to worldly standards, will not leave his wife even if she is disabled. The more I flounder, the brighter his halo becomes. That's when I realized. He has always been moving forward. Never looking back, pulling me out of the deep mud. It's been a long time since the two of us have looked at each other like this. There is something moving in John's eyes. It seems he has remembered that he once loved me. He poured all the passionate feelings of his youth into me. He never gave as much to his first love. Mary. But love can wither. It's like eating a sweet plum. If you don't plant the pit back in the soil and take care of it, it will dry up, go moldy, and eventually lose all its beauty and become disgusting. John didn't realize this. As he gazed at me, a crack appeared in his cold mask. He crouched down and leaned in to give me a pitying kiss. After all, in his eyes, I had lost my husband's love and relapsed into depression and become attached to a robot. And so I really did look pitiful. He came closer and whispered, Jenny, if you're good, I won't abandon you. I felt sick at the smell of his aggressive perfume. So I slapped him right across the face as he came closer. Since I've been in the wheelchair, I haven't had the chance to do that to him again. Looking at John's shocked and red face, the pent-up anger of many years suddenly dissipated. I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. Thank you for your kindness. But I have to correct you. You didn't abandon me. I abandoned you. I've had the divorce papers in his secretary's hands for 2 days. Why can't he see that? John couldn't believe I would file for divorce. He said I was sick. I needed treatment. Not a divorce. He came up with a lot of psychological reasons. But none of them were. I don't love him anymore. That possibility. He even thought Michael was behind it. Something about Michael controlling me mentally. Michael is controlling me. I'm tired of his incessant questioning. Sitting in a wheelchair, tilting his head to look out the window, and waiting for Michael to bring me the limited edition raspberry cake from the other side of town. John, who had just returned from the office, took off his suit jacket in annoyance and threw it down along with the unsigned divorce papers. Even though it was clear that there was no longer any love between us. At the moment, he was acting as if he could no longer stand my indifference. He would rather I hysterically flew into jealous rages at him than be as detached and silent as I was now. If I didn't love him, why would I rely on a robot that looked exactly like him? It's ridiculous. I find it ridiculous too. I turn to him and ask, didn't you specifically order Michael to be made in your image? Isn't that ridiculous? John's anger seems to be paused for a moment. He denies it in disbelief. It wasn't me. John says when he bought Michael, he told the robotics company to send me a template of the robot's appearance and let me adjust the appearance parameters to my liking. But I never received it. If no one has set Michael to look like John, then where did Michael? The bracelet on my wrist bone flickers blue. The atmosphere in the room suddenly freezes in a strange way. John senses something is wrong. He quickly takes out his phone and dials the number of the robot company. The person on the other end is also surprised to hear the situation. The person in charge, with a Manchester accent, explains that it will take at least 2 years to customize a robot. It will be even more troublesome to go through the procedures across the ocean. So John's order does not even exist yet. Not to mention the fact that they simply cannot find a robot with the number Michael. John is furious. Over the years, he has dominated the market. And no one has ever been able to fool him so much. He is more and more convinced that Michael has other intentions towards me. Tell someone to keep an eye on the villa. Once you find Michael, arrest him as soon as he returns. I want to see what kind of pervert is trying to get close to you. He gnashed his teeth. Because this is a very embarrassing matter. John hid it from the people outside. Everyone just thought that there was a thief in the house. The Mary family didn't pay it any mind. They still called John as usual. And asked John to help Mary find a job. When John got the call, unlike before, he didn't leave immediately. He hesitated and glanced at me. He was worried and said, "If anything happens, press the alarm at any time. There are bodyguards downstairs." I nodded perfunctorily. And stared fixedly out the window. Dull cumulonimbus clouds drifted by. The dampness of the earth floated in the air. It was going to rain. The road back to the city would definitely be very congested. John didn't hear my exact response. He frowned and repeated it. "Did you remember?" I turned my back to him. Impatiently raised his voice. "I got it. Why haven't you left yet? Be careful. Your little cherry blossom princess might cry." I don't know if John is a bastard. He was amused by my sarcastic tone. It seems that he has turned back into the 20-year-old John, coaxing a jealous girlfriend. He said gently, "Be a good girl. You want raspberry cake. I'll bring it back when I come back." As if he knew where the cake shop was. Dead scumbag. I made a face at the window. After a while, I remembered Michael. My face fell again. Michael. What an asshole. Liar. Bad guy. The sound of rain pattering on the flower pots by the balcony. I cover my face and try hard to hold back the urge to cry with a sour feeling. It's okay. It's not the first time I've been cheated on. All the things he said he loved me were lies. Didn't I know that already? But why can't I stop being sad? Why do I always have to be so stupid? Time and time again, believing I'll be loved. Just as I'd finished beating Michael to death in my head 100 times. I decided to seal my heart and lock my love. Suddenly, a skeletal hand appeared on the balcony outside. A tall, dark figure jumped in. It was soaked to the bone. I stared wide-eyed as I watched Michael leisurely open the balcony door. His wet black hair hung down. And his red, full lips held a box of exquisitely wrapped raspberry cake. With every step, he left a shoe print on the floor. Michael just walked over from above and pinched the tip of my nose between his forefinger and thumb. His cold voice repeated, "Bastard. Liar. Scoundrel." I looked at the bracelet on my wrist and immediately realized. "You're spying on me." "Yes. Baby." Michael laughed without a care in the world. Tilting his head, a strand of hair fell and made a drop of rain. "Are you going to arrest me? The alarm is right here. Just press it. And 5 burly bodyguards will grab Michael. Michael will be sent away. To prison. Or will he be greeted by a robotic factory across the ocean? Will he be destroyed or reformed? He doesn't look scared at all. As if he thinks I will definitely go soft on him. Then he really is. Right." I stared at him angrily. For a long time before letting out a frustrated sigh. I looked down at him, the wet rain trails on his trouser legs. The cake shop on the other side of town is far away. It takes half a day to go there and back. And raspberry cake is the hardest to wait for. John once asked someone to stand in line for him but got impatient. After we got married, I never went back. He would buy me more expensive and more exquisite cakes. But he would never waste another second on me. Michael came to visit. Occasionally. He learned that I liked that one. So throughout the long summer, the season when raspberries ripen, Michael would always buy me the freshest batch on time. Today it's raining heavily. Michael is in a mess. But the cake in his hands is not damaged in the slightest. After a moment of silence, I pushed him hard. "My eyes sting. Just go. I'll pretend I've never seen you." Michael didn't move. and calmly examined me. "Why are you crying?" I shook my head and just repeated the order for him to leave. But Michael still asked, "Do you want me to go? Why are you crying again?" The rain got heavier and flew into the balcony, cracking and knocking on the glass. My mood was as gloomy as the weather. I opened my mouth and was about to speak. Suddenly, I keenly heard the car's engine turn off downstairs. I was afraid that John had returned early. I pointed at the closet and told Michael to hide quickly. He looked at me dreamily, slowly took off his shoes, and wiped the shoe prints on the floor, cowered into the closet, and asked earnestly, "Is this cheating as described on TV?" To be honest, sometimes I really want to pry open his brain, to see what kind of thinking processes he has. Soon, there were footsteps upstairs. Someone knocked politely on the door. It was me. The door opened. But the person who came in was Mary. Mary walked in. Her refined and quiet temperament was completely unlike the inferiority complex and rusticity of her school days. At that time I didn't know that she and John had a period. I saw her being bullied and teased by the group of snobs from the Gowling family. And I helped her a few times. But she seemed to have forgotten that she was later recognized as the Mary family. And she treated me like a stranger. So we really can't be considered friendly. Is there something wrong? I asked in puzzlement. John is not here. Mary looked around the room and smiled. I have seen him. I heard him talk about the robot by your side. I was a little worried. So I came to see you. John is not afraid of losing face. And told her everything. After a few brief words of greeting, I thought about the wardrobe still containing Michael, and planned to ask her to leave. But then Mary asked. John said that robot knows a lot about you. She even investigated the original nanny. Her eyes were focused in the dim room. And they were so dark they made me feel uncomfortable. I subconsciously rejected her fake friendly inquiry. About the past. What business is it of hers? I thought she had heard the rumors about me as a child. And deliberately came to upset me. So her face fell. Don't get me wrong. I really am worried about you. That nanny tried to murder me. And then there's this unidentified robot who came out of nowhere. If there's a connection between them, isn't that very dangerous? Mary is a consummate diplomat. Her expression of concern is like a gentle spring breeze. What she says sounds reasonable at first. But on second thought, it smacks of deliberate manipulation. And what's more, she's saying nasty things about Michael. That really gets on my nerves. Anyway, my reputation as a bad-tempered person has long since spread throughout the circle. So I simply don't bother being polite to her. And told her to go back to where she came from. Mary looked a little embarrassed. She forced a smile. And said, "After all, we are sisters. I advise you not to believe everything the robot says just because it looks like John. That kind of thing has no feelings." After she said that, she seemed unable to continue acting like sisters. She hurriedly left. I looked at her back. And was puzzled. I muttered to myself and turned around. I didn't notice when Michael came out. He stood behind me. And startled me. "What's going on? Are you really trying to murder me?" I glared at him angrily. Michael looked at me lovingly. As if I were a spoiled child. "My dear. If I had such thoughts, you would have gone to meet your maker by now. Forget it. I can't argue with him." I looked listless and told him to go away quickly. But Michael laughed a few times. And took something out of his trouser pocket. Cinderella has not yet completely turned over. Defeated the villain. How can the savior go? That thing is a photo. In the dim light of a rainy day. It is old and yellowed. A mother and daughter sitting in a cramped rural shack. With identical gloomy, cowering expressions. Seeing the faces of those two people made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. How could they be together? Nanny Susan and Mary. Two people who on the surface did not have any intersection. But in reality were actually foster mother and foster daughter. I looked at the photo for a long time. Unable to return to my senses. I asked Michael. "Where did you get this from?" Michael casually dusted the collar of his shirt. Passing by the mental hospital. And dropped in for a visit. Perceiving my gaze, Michael raised an eyebrow. Is that not allowed? No, it's very painful. I shook my head and turned my attention back. Michael analyzed the car accident. Mary was most likely involved in planning it. Otherwise Susan would not have known so accurately the route and time of my departure. But why would Mary do that? She was already the daughter of the Mary family. What threat could I possibly pose to her? Michael unbuttoned his collar and said, "What if she wasn't?" I froze. You mean Mary lied to the Mary family? The original Mary was found with a string of blessed beads around her neck, which her father had gone to the mountains to pray for after the birth of his daughter. And there was a burn mark on the back of Mary's neck, which made Mary's mother burst into tears and convinced her that Mary was her daughter. And later Mary even volunteered to do a paternity test. And the results were all correct. Michael stood by the window and tilted his head and smiled, using Sherlock Holmes' thinking, "Dear, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever is left, even if it is impossible, it must be the truth." In the rain, Michael's low voice echoed in the silent house. And he spoke of a common sense that we often ignore. A paternity test can also be done on dead people's hair. I suddenly realized. The real Mary family daughter may be dead. Susan then wanted to replace her with her own daughter. And as a child, Susan often showed her true nature to me. What she did to me, she probably did to the Mary family daughter too. Uncontrollable images flashed through my mind. The collar. The dog bowl. The nursery rhyme that used to puzzle me. Little bird. Has no feet. So cannot fly. I turned pale. And swallowed hard. My fingers trembled by my side. But then. Michael. The sudden movement that followed sent me reeling. My mind a blank. I froze. What are you doing? I looked up at him in surprise. His long, pale hands were on the edge of the belt. He raised his eyebrows at my question. He explained gently. You need to change your clothes when they get wet. That's common sense. Baby. I was suddenly brought back to reality. And was speechless. Don't undress in front of me. Brother. Michael. Shamelessly agreed. Brother. This term. And laughed in a flirty tone. Don't be angry. Dear sister. I just want to get your attention. I blushed. For a long time. My mind couldn't turn. And I couldn't think of anything to say back. When I was about to explode with anger, the door suddenly creaked open. John's puzzled voice rang out. Why is it locked? Jenny. What are you doing in there? I sighed in annoyance. Here we go again. And Michael had already picked up the clothes he had taken off and was naturally slipping them into the closet. With a skilled gesture of cheating on his wife. After I had finally finished with John in the hallway. When I returned to my room, the balcony door was wide open. The wind and rain had eased. The wind blew the curtains and they swayed lightly. My heart tightened. I turned my wheelchair and rushed to the closet. Michael had gone. An indescribable sense of loss. My head leaned against the closet door. My eyes were dull. Just as I was at a loss. Suddenly I caught a glimpse of 2 lines of exquisite inscriptions on the inside of the closet. Let me repay you with a grand gift of revenge. My young master. Then. We will be fair and square. Together. We will walk in the sunshine. My fingers slowly traced the words. At that moment. I felt as if I had already been redeemed. Without walking. Without legs. I had already reached the other side. The summer storm quietly came to an end. The storm in the city came with a bang. On the busiest Monday morning, the entire city center network in City is suddenly crashed for half an hour. Especially the Mary family and John's company. Each work computer and conference room display rotated and played a shocking murder plot. News. Forums. And the company's private account. Followed by a crazy discussion by netizens. With all this evidence, Susan the nanny was not only a psychopath who had attempted to murder, but also guilty of abduction, assault and battery, and all kinds of other heinous crimes against Mary's biological daughter. This time it was Mary's family who went crazy. It happened to be a family dinner. And all the relatives witnessed Mary's mother's face go from white to red. Even Mary's father, who was usually so calm, nearly fainted. And Mary, who had been so composed in her noble status, suddenly lost her composure. Her eyes went blank, fixed her gaze on the TV screen. Mary's mother's heart was torn apart. Her own daughter had been sold, abused and made ill by Susan. Yet she had treated the enemy's daughter like a jewel in her palm. She rushed towards Mary, swung her arm menacingly, and grabbed Mary by the hair, questioning her. "You know everything. For more than 20 years. You and your daughter have deceived us for more than 20 years. Where is my real daughter? My Mary? Give her back to me. Give her back to me." Mary's mouth was bleeding from the blows. Her body swayed with each step. A strange calmness. A light smile. I called out to Mary. "Mom. You're Mary. Your little treasure. You've given me everything I've ever wanted." Mary's mother couldn't believe that the person in front of her could still be so calm. It was as if she were a heartless monster. She almost couldn't catch her breath. She was pulled up by Mary's father and several relatives. Mary's mother pounded her chest in pain and cried with remorse. "What sins have I committed?" And Mary's innocent black eyes, which were always downcast and timid, now seemed to quietly burn with a fire of resentment, burning silently into me. She watched me from afar, with a smile on her face. But no sound came from her lips. "It was your dog that did it, wasn't it?" I looked expressionless, exhausted by the human tragedy before me. There are always these people in the world, addicted to fantasy, mistaking daydreams for reality, fanatical and blind. They defend their madness, at the cost of slaughter. Obsessed and extreme. John finally seemed to come back from his shock. He looked at me long and complicatedly, stood silently in front of me, shielding Mary's gaze from me. Soon, the police came to the door and took Mary, the suspected accomplice. She passed me and glanced at my right leg. She twitched her lips and muttered something meaningless. I shouldn't have been soft-hearted. Susan wanted to kill me in the first place. Maybe Mary remembered that I had helped her. But is that being merciful? Whoever sheds human blood must be killed. Just like my name. Jenny. Jenny. I still believe Michael's words more. All absurdity will eventually be rewarded. This sensational trial that shocked the city came to an end in late summer. Mary was imprisoned. The ashes of Mary's family's daughter were buried deep in the mountains for more than 10 years. And finally returned to her family. Mary's mother cried her eyes out. John had been taken care of by Mary's family for many years. And he was also busy. While Michael, who was manipulating everything behind the scenes, was calm and collected, whistling. While John was away, I was stolen from John's villa. After all this, I feel like I'm really in a fairy tale. I smiled and asked him, "Are you really my savior?" With a click, Michael fastened my seat belt for me. With a quirk of his lips, he asked in return, "Do you finally want to get to know me?" The azure light shone on his straight nose, refracting a small angle. A clear light and shadow floated in those deep eyes. "Yes." I smiled slightly, and firmly said, "I want to get to know you." Michael. Handsome. Spun the steering wheel with one hand, and drove me to the airport. "Don't cry." Then, the plane flew across the ocean and mountains, to the other side of the world, to Mount Garnet. It was covered in snow all year round, and the towering peak stood like a giant at the top of the mountain. I sat in a wheelchair and looked up, and felt like I could never look at the top of the mountain enough. The white snow looked like a canopy. Michael bent down and rested his chin on my cap. He took my hand, lifted it up, and pointed to the highest peak. His voice was so soft. He said, "Jenny, your mom and dad are up there." My heart trembled, and I looked there in an electric shock-like manner. The so-called 1,000 mountains and no birds can describe that silent and dangerous peak. Michael said my real parents were scientists and explorers. After your mom was pregnant with you, your dad built me. Michael said slowly, "You can say that I exist for you. However, when I was 3 years old, I unfortunately got lost in a small town abroad. My parents were so panicked that They put down their careers and searched everywhere. For 7 whole years. They got no results. The couple traveled halfway around the world. And issued countless missing person notices. Finally. By chance. My mother heard that those who climbed Mount cannot would receive God's blessings. Scientists generally have an extraordinary faith and romanticism. The couple was determined to seek divine guidance for their missing daughter. They took Michael and set foot on the isolated peak, which had always been considered extremely dangerous by explorers. Unfortunately, God did not favor them. An avalanche buried them in a mountain crater. Their oxygen ran out. With no help in sight, they looked at the only one who might be able to walk out, Michael. Michael, you don't need oxygen. So the couple used all the strength they had left in their lives to lift Michael and let him climb out on top of their bodies. When they saw the light, Michael heard his master give him his last order in a weak voice. Which was, "Find you." Michael tenderly cupped my tear-stained face. His face, which had long since lost its disguise, was as cold as a knife, and as beautiful as a god. So Jenny, you are not an unloved child. I climbed out of the snow-capped mountains on the bones of your parents, after overcoming countless hardships, just to come and love you. Michael leaned over and kissed me tenderly, and sighed. Because of you, I learned what it means to have my heart broken. The cold air entered my nose, but in Michael's arms it was warm and spring-like. In his company, I once again found the courage to look at the mountain peak where my family is buried. People can live without legs, I silently assured them in my heart. Because people know that they are loved, they gain the courage to love again.